Emotional algebra where the heart meets the math. What is integral is derivative as you figure out your path. Power plus emotions equals more than you can see. Listening to the wisdom of our host, Dr. E. Emotional algebra with Dr. E.
Hey guys, here we are with our singy, your singy, and my singy. Chris Singleton is here to join us for our discussion on rivalries. He's sharing his time generously and greatly appreciate that. So thanks for joining us today, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I had a question for you. Which national championship hat should I wear today on the show? The 7 national championship or the 8 national championship hat?
I mean, the only thing that matters, right, is if you beat Michigan, right?
Uh, Point taken. Point taken. So yeah, you gotta love that. Gotta love that. So again, we're having a lot of fun with rivalries here and talking about these things. So I know that we talked about the last episode. You did play college sports at Nevada, and wanted just to quickly kind of talk about some of your rivals and what was the difference between those games, and how did you feel after a W or an L?
Yeah, I mean, my rival at the University of Nevada Reno in football was, the team down in the South, the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So much so that even till this day, when someone says, "Hey, you went to UNLV, right?" It's almost like fighting words. It's like, no, I went to UNR. And just as much as last night,
Mhm.
I think UNLV was playing Boise State. So my old producer, I didn't realize the game was on. I wasn't paying attention to it, but he sends me a text and says, "Hey, your school is playing for a championship or something tonight, right?" And I was like, not that I know of. I mean, who are they playing?" And then he goes, "UNLV versus Boise State." So I proceeded to give him some choice words. I started digging in, but difference. UNLV is red, we're blue. They're south, we're north. They're the big, city with, that never sleeps, that's crazy, out of control. Reno's kind of more, under control with the casinos and everything else. But, when it came to football, being introduced to that rivalry, coming out of high school and you step into these things. It's not something
Mhm.
that you necessarily, grew up with unless you lived in that town and you went to the school. So it's something that as a kid that you carry. But for me, I didn't carry that. So I was introduced to the rivalry, and for the first time on that level, which is more comparable to professional Major League Baseball, just seeing the energy of the fans. And I think that's like the big thing, is that you see how important it is to people that aren't wearing the uniform, that ultimately, like, you may think, "Oh, it's just another football game. We got to go out and get a W. What does it matter?" But when you start sensing the buildup over, the week leading up to the game, and how many people are invested, people that even back when I was playing, and especially in the state of Nevada, you had people gambling, betting, and, all kinds of
Mhm.
different, side bets, and businesses up in the north with businesses in the south. And so you kind of take that on a little bit, and you want to win it and do something bigger than just for yourself or for your teammates, but really, for the city that you're in.
Mhm. Do you feel like that kind of got into your head or other players' heads at time and affected performance, sometimes negatively?
No, I think I mean, it was during the time when I played college as well. I think there was quite a bit less pressure. There wasn't as much exposure, even though we wanted, to have a lot of exposure. We didn't have social media rolling like they do today. Didn't have NIL money where guys are getting paid. So they're treated a little bit more like professional athletes in some ways in terms of the scrutiny that's on them. But for us, no, it was great. It was just an extension really of high school, and just on a bigger stage, and just wanting to go out there and say, "Hey man, we're going to go out there. We're going to win this game. We're going to take the cannon back if we had lost it the year before, or we're going to keep the cannon, if we win this game." So that was kind of the driver, that I would say.
Hmm. Hmm. And
Uh,
you were in another North-South rivalry too in major leagues, right?
yeah, yeah, playing for the Chicago White Sox on the south side of the city, and then you had the Chicago Cubs, who are on the north side, and kind of a difference in a lot of ways. The Cubs playing on television every day, and on WGN which was a national network, whereas the White Sox were playing more on a regional type of network. And so, with that said, the Cubs, amassed, a lot more fans across the country than the Chicago White Sox. But
Mhm.
when it came to the city, that was definitely a next level in terms of the passion. And in a city like Chicago, where people are pretty passionate about sports, you could really feel just how big it was. When that series would come up, every year, it was like a party that everybody was getting ready for, and guys, have the opportunity to have bragging rights. And for us, again, you're playing 162 games over the course of the season. So this is just another series in all reality. It's like 3 games.
Mhm.
But you feel it, especially playing baseball every single day. It just kind of becomes routine. You look up, who are we playing today? But you
Mhm.
feel the difference when you step on the field for batting practice and you're playing a rivalry like the Chicago Cubs. It's like, oh, wait a minute. There's a
Mhm.
whole other level of energy and passion that's going to go into this series. And so you can't help but sort of take on that energy. I really think that's what it is. It's like there's an energy and a vibe there that you can't help but take on and
Mhm.
sort of increase your focus, and I think create more of an urgency to go out there and win the game.
Mhm. Mhm. Now, at that level, do you feel like there was any added pressures or whatever from how fans responded that negatively impacted some players, or again, same situation where it's just an intensity, you feel the intensity and you roll with it?
Yeah, I didn't personally, I didn't feel any, added pressure. More than anything, it was an opportunity. And I was like, and I'm thankful because I didn't always see every situation as an opportunity. And there's a big shift in energy and perspective when you go from, I have to compared to I get to, And
Mhm.
so for me, I always tended to have, I get to go out and compete on the field and beat this other team as an opportunity. And so for me, and I would say for most of my teammates, it was just, it was a rally together. It was really one of those times, um, the difference in professional sports and like college or high school. And let's just say, with college, you're really playing for your school, you're playing for the student body, you're playing for a lot. High school, the same thing, right? But when you get to the professionals, there's a lot of emphasis on each individual. You have to perform. So even if you guys win games and you don't perform, there's still like kind of this negativity to the fact that, yeah, we're winning, but you're not performing and you're a professional and you're getting paid. So, that element can be there. But I just feel like, when we had our Cubs series, that it was kind of more like being in college or high school again, because it was all about, getting that W, getting that win. And I think when teams can, especially, speaking professional Major League Baseball, when they can move into that mindset, that's where championship teams, as long as they have the talent, that's what they're born out of, because guys are playing for the name on the front of the jersey. We talk about not the name on the back of the jersey. And
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
always, in my opinion, 99% of the time, it seems that when championship teams are celebrating in the locker room, and champagne's being poured everywhere, there's always
Mhm.
going to be some guy that says, "Hey, we really cared about each other. We really looked out after each other." And that seems to be the common thread that runs through championship teams, is that there was another level of intention and care and support of your teammates, good, bad, and indifferent, that carried you through a long season.
Mhm. Do you think the number of games between like NFL and Major League Baseball, do you think that makes a difference in the emphasis that's put on each game or even some of these rivalry games? Because you had a series, whereas in NFL you get it between Chicago and Green Bay or Cleveland and Pittsburgh. Do you think that
Yeah.
makes a difference?
Um, I think they're parallels. They're definitely different, but I think the sort of psychological impact. So let's just say for football, you want to win that game, right? For a series, you want to win that series. So we can't just
Mhm.
go out and win one game. We got to win 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 3. We win 2 out of the 3. We got bragging rights that we won the series. We win all three. then people are getting the brooms out in the stands, and that is a laugher and something for the fans that they are going to ride until, the next year until you play that team again.
So when you weren't on the winning side of the series or even the winning side of your rivalry, did you ever experience fans, maybe not directly but indirectly, or knew of other players that experienced fan uh, behavior that was negative and threatening even?
No, I would say and I'll give you an example. So I would say for us, let's just say with the Chicago White Sox, playing the Chicago Cubs, you're playing a team that's in the National League. We're in the American League. So ultimately, it doesn't really matter. But let's just say we're going to compare and contrast the Boston Red Sox and the New York Yankees. If
Hmm.
you don't, and for so long, those two teams were at each other's throats. I mean, it hasn't been over the past 10 years or so. It hasn't been as intense as it was, in the early 2000s, where it was like this was the series in all of baseball. And so I would say for players in those situations, especially because they're both in the American League, they're both in the same division, that if you didn't perform in those series, there was a lot more scrutiny on you as a player, whether you were a Yankee or a Red Sox.
Do you think the history of the winning histories of those teams or any team has an impact on the intensity of the rivalry and the sense of ownership? In the previous part of this episode, I talked about that emotional algebraic equation that goes into how we invest in our teams and what we do, and then those then even increased in rivalries. Do you feel like that's an issue that does have an impact on that?
Yeah, I do. I think you have two very storied franchises. Obviously, the Yankees have, what, 26 championships, 27. I mean,
Hmm.
so they're really sort of, historically the organization. But the Red Sox, have had a lot of great players and they've had, some really great runs as well. Um, I think the big thing is that you have two of the best sports towns, in all of sports. When you look at Boston and the
Hmm.
fans there and how educated they are and how they understand the game. You look at the passion of New York and the city and the Yankee fans. So I think that also, those markets, and again, we're talking about not only extremely passionate fan bases, but they were large markets, two of the largest markets in baseball.
Hmm.
So, I mean,
Hmm.
you've got New York, LA, Chicago, Boston, um, all there in the top four. So I think that had a lot to do with it as well. And it was for a good while. I mean, it was like going to war when the Yankees and Red Sox, and I never played, for either of those teams in the major leagues. I played for the Yankees in AAA, but I would, as a broadcaster for ESPN for many years,
Hmm.
um, we always cover those series. And so you would see, hey, just how big of a deal it was. It
Hmm.
lost a little bit of its um, intensity it's lost some of that over the years. And it's only because these two teams haven't met up in the playoffs very much over the last 10, 12
Right.
years. That was a
Right.
really big fuel for it before, was that they would meet up in the postseason. Not only did they knew during the season they were going to battle, but they also knew we're going to see each other in the playoffs. And so that was
Hmm.
just kind of heightened every series, every game throughout the regular season into the postseason.
Hmm. Hmm. So winning definitely has a big degree of on an impact as a variable on that equation of the intensity of the emotions of wins and losses, you would say.
Yeah, yeah, and I think if you perform well in those series, um,
Hmm.
it can be good for your individual career as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah,
Because you're a clutch player, right?
yeah, you're a clutch player. You're making an impact on, let's just say a Yankees Red Sox series during the regular season,
Hmm.
has the stage and platform and attention of perhaps, more of a Kansas City, Detroit, Tigers playoff round in the first round of the playoffs. There's
Hmm.
more into a August or September Yankees Red Sox series than there would be into the first round of the playoffs if the Royals and the Tigers were playing or something like that. So it
Right.
has October postseason feel during the
Mm-hmm.
regular season.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I've got a slide here I wanted to discuss with you that brings up the stress of that of sports fan bases, how they can impact the psychology of teams, and we'll touch a little bit on players too. But I wanted to get your thoughts on each of these points here to consider. So the first issue is the performance pressure. We've touched on that a little bit, and maybe whether you're as a player or announcer, you saw a lot of teams play. You saw some of the impacts of people who maybe got in their head or they got the yips, whatever they call. How much would you say between college and or professional sports that sports fan bases affect that pressure?
Yeah, it's definitely at another level in, professional sports because you're getting paid. There is an evolution taking place on the college level because you've got, you know, players making six figures, some seven figures. So they're going
Hmm.
to start to be treated a little more like a professional player. But that performance pressure, if you're in the right frame of mind, you're actually feeding off of it. It's if it can be a healthy pressure, if there can be a healthy fear of failure, then you're in a good spot. If you don't feel some level of like performance pressure or fear of failure, in my
Hmm.
opinion and in my experience, those are the days where I go out and I'm flat and I get beat. I
Hmm.
needed to have a little butterflies. I needed to have a little bit of an edge. And as far as I think for the successful professional athlete, he's really asking of himself more than what the fans are asking. And
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
the problem is that when you get outside of yourself and you start paying attention to the pressure, of the fans that they're putting on you, then it means you've lost your focus.
Right.
And to get to that point, you've always had to be your toughest critic.
Hmm. And right there, you're talking about your own personal emotional algebra and the emotional algebra of each athlete. And yesterday we talked about arousal level, and I talked about you need to have it, and you addressed it there about having that optimal arousal level, not too low and not too high, because that performance curve is at that optimal arousal. You're at peak performance when you find that balance. And I talked about in some of my work in sports psychology of giving people the word zone as a word to help get them into that zone as a post hypnotic suggestion. And I'm sure there's a lot of different players that do that. Now, what percentage of players do you think are at college and or pro are ready for that fan pressure, and do you think they're almost prepared for that fan pressure before, in their little leagues and their maybe their AAU or pre college pre pro experiences?
Yeah, that's a tough one to answer because the landscape is changing so much. And
Hmm.
in some ways, you might look and say that the kids today um, might be a little tougher because everything that they're exposed to. I mean, you're seeing your competition, even as kids playing in travel ball and 12 years old, 13 years old. You can go on Instagram, you can go on and you can see kids, they're taking their swings, working out, like playing games, hitting home runs. So you're seeing this comparison, all of the time. Like, we talk about for adults, you go on Facebook and some people have Facebook depression because they're looking and they're seeing other people's best life, like it's being
Hmm.
lived every single day. Oh, they're on vacation. Oh, they went here. Oh, they went there. And you're sitting there and you're saying, well, we're not doing those things, or maybe we can't afford to do that right now. And now all of a sudden you get depressed. So I think, as it relates to these younger athletes, there is this sort of opportunity. It can be an opportunity and also can be a detriment, but you're seeing what other kids are doing and how they're performing. So that can put more pressure on you to try to perform and do better so that you can post your highlights.
Hmm.
Or it's something that can perhaps prepare that kid that, hey, listen, I'm growing up in comparison across, and not just in my little town, across the country. and maybe and
Mhm.
sometimes even a little internationally, um,
Mhm.
because there are no, boundaries on social media. And
Right.
so I can't say because I haven't grown up and lived through it, but I think
Mhm.
there's potential for both sides. And with that
Mhm.
said, I believe that players today, especially, you know, college and more so professional levels, with all of the outlets of gambling and betting on the sports and all of the social media and 24/7 news highlights. Like for me, when I was playing, if I wanted to escape from outside noise, I just don't read the Chicago Sun-Times. That was a
Right.
newspaper. That's all we had to worry about. That's easy.
Mhm.
Now, if you have a cell phone, which every human being does essentially, you can't help but run into something online, perhaps about yourself. If you're not performing well, or whatever, or maybe you are performing well, or somebody happens
Mhm.
to send you something, or something pops up, or and then I think the curiosity, right, that kills the cat. The
Mhm.
temptation is harder when you're on your phone all the time to not scroll or to not look or to not read something being said about yourself.
Right.
For me,
Right.
as a newspaper only person, it was just easy. Don't read the newspaper. Just get it. I didn't carry the newspaper around with me all the time to where as
Right.
I'm sitting in the doctor's office, I'm bored. I'm going to open up the paper and look at the sports page. Like that wasn't the
Yeah.
case. But with your cell phone, you have it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Now we talked earlier with Andrew and I talked about Trey Turner and
Mhm.
at Philadelphia Phillies, how when he got in a slump, he was paid a lot of money to pay for the Phillies, but the fans came together and they tried something different. They gave him a standing ovation.
Mhm.
What do you think the effect of the on sports in general would be if fans took that approach versus the approach that they sometimes take of sometimes in rare state places death threats or trolling them or finding out where they live and doxing them or putting for sale signs in their front yards? I mean, all these things happen in some situations. So what do you think would be the overall effect on sport if that was the situation of fans to support, to clap for them, encourage them?
I think it's all about timing. Um, Particularly at the professional level. And what I mean by timing with the fans is when you're in the major leagues of baseball, you're getting paid really well. Even if you're a rookie and you're making
Mhm.
750, $800,000, you're getting paid really well. And then you have guys that are making seven, eight, nine, figure contracts. So you are paid to perform. And the average family that's coming to the game that's making, 60, $70,000 a year or whatever, they don't want to hear like how tough your life is and how hard it is and the pressure and oh man, give me a break, whatever. Because they're like, hey, give me that money. I'll take, most people say, give me that money. I'll take all of that, pressure and
Mhm.
scrutiny. But what I mean is that ultimately there needs to be a balance, or a balance would be welcomed. And so for Trey Turner, it wasn't they were booing him. They were on him, and Philly fans as well. That's one of the, when you're talking about fan bases and passion and fans, you've got places like New York, Boston, Philadelphia, San Francisco, when they were, several years back, like 10 years ago when they were really good. That atmosphere was incredible. And those are some of my top, places in the league to go and broadcast games because the atmosphere was just unreal. And
Mhm.
Philly, I mean, Philly fans, right? They have the old, you know, uh, uh, reputation of having booed Santa Claus, right? And with the Eagles game, and that's a whole other story. I mean, it's kind of gotten, become like, myth and legend,
Mhm.
the story. But when you really look at the story, they weren't booing Santa Claus; they were booing like a bad Santa Claus that was half drunk, that like didn't, that they
Right.
pulled down onto the field to try to fulfill the role of Santa's appearance because Santa got stuck in the snow and couldn't get to the ballpark that day. So they were booing a bootleg Santa. They weren't booing Santa Claus himself. But anyway, I digress. Getting back to, Philly fans, man, those are like, that can be a tough place to play. I mean, guys, back in the day, I remember JD Drew was there and they were on him. Fans would throw batteries at the players sometimes, and visiting players or home players. So being such a tough environment, they were definitely on him. And for Trey Turner signing a contract to, play in Philly, knowing, hey, they have an expectation, and I'm
Mhm.
going to have to go out here and perform, not just for myself, for my teammates, but the fans. I
Mhm.
have to perform for the fans, or else they're going to give it to me. And that comes with the territory. And I think in terms of timing, you're not going to come out of the gates with a player like if you're the fans and saying, "Hey, we're going to keep cheering them on." You might early on in the season, and here's the ebb and flow. Maybe things get off to a little bit of a slow start. Hey, we're pulling for you. Come on, you can do it. You can do it. You can do it. But then when that performance continues to stink for an extended period of time, then they turn on you and then they start booing you because it's like we're getting paid all this money. You're getting paid all this money. You're not performing. You're booing. But then I think they finally got to a point of exhaustion where it was like, all right, it's no good for us to beat this guy down anymore. I mean, we've
Mhm.
beaten him down as far as we possibly can. Let's try something else. Let's cheer
Mhm.
for him as if he just hit a home run, his last
Right.
at bat, or he just had 2 home runs last game. And so they did something that I don't know has ever been done before as well
Mhm.
at Citizens Bank Park, there in Philadelphia. But they did something I would say, somewhat heroic as fans in
Yeah.
Philadelphia to turn the tide and get behind this guy after extended struggle. And,
Mhm.
I think it's a beautiful story of how that support and that encouragement when he was, perhaps at his lowest low, really helped to pull him out and get him to a place where he's performing at the level that his potential is and helping that team, get into the postseason. So I think it's a great story. And I think it's a great story, Eric, based upon where it's coming from. If that
Mhm.
happens in, Kansas
Yeah.
City, okay, Detroit, okay,
Right.
maybe LA, those are a little softer fan bases, but you got hardcore fans in Philadelphia. So the
Yeah.
contrast of them pivoting and taking that action, I think just speaks volumes.
And that's why I say I think that if we looked at that across sport, but especially in that situation, it's almost miraculous that that occurred. I think it could absolutely be huge. I'm sure and again, my minor in sports psychology I have is you don't coach every player the same, and I think there are some players like you were saying who respond almost better in some ways and are more motivated from the way they perceive success and failure, how they internalize it, how they express it. If they are booed a little bit, sometimes that can bring them up and increase their arousal level in some ways. For some players, it takes them past. And I think if time was spent early on in a player's career, helping them understand and getting in the psychology of how they are affected by pressure and by stress. I think there are a lot of some of these quarterbacks that are come out of college in the first round who played for, maybe some elite teams, but then they get drafted, they don't perform. I think sometimes they're not used to experiencing some of those challenges of feeling failure because they're getting drafted by teams that aren't as good. That gets in their head, and then they start to get in the yips or have their issues. So I think that performance pressure, you're right. It is about timing. I think it's about some of these variables that they may not know or are known or unknown. And then some of these factors of the interaction with the city. I think city psychology has a lot to do with this of is our energy as a city a winning attitude, a winning energy. And I think that's what also affects fan attitudes is sometimes they just don't believe that they can win. So some of that too. But to keep going. So emotional investment, I think that's what we're talking about too, is depending on the win-lose record and or history of that team, there is a different level of emotional investment from a fan base. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. You can take places, um, particularly places that are, what they call these blue collar towns, right? Where,
Hmm.
you got guys that, you know, pack a hard hat and a lunch pail to work and they're working, construction, they're doing things, places like Pittsburgh, places like, Philadelphia, perhaps Green Bay, places like that. And I think that, there's an investment that they have because there's not as much, around in their areas to like, you know, be into or going on. You take a place like Los Angeles, right? And here's one of the things about LA, whether it's the Dodgers, not as much the Dodgers as the Angels, but one thing like we'd always notice about playing in Southern California was that the game starts and the fans, aren't really like here, they kind of show up, casually show up and like make their, appearance. And, it's just kind of more laid back. Where you go to these
Mhm.
other places, man, these people are diehard. They are there early. They're ready to go from the first pitch. So I
Out
think in terms,
tailgating and,
yeah,
having a lot of fun
yeah.
and camaraderie, building community, I think, too.
Yeah, so I think the emotional investment is these people live on it. I mean, they literally live on their team and how their team, is performing, and if they're going to get to the playoffs this year, they're going to win it. And so you think about that emotional investment, which I think in turn can make the player um become a little more emotionally invested as well. Because when you see, I think personally, when you see this big disparity between what we're making as pro athletes and like
Mhm.
what these average fans make for a living and how hard they work, I think
Mhm.
that creates a greater emotional investment for you to go out there and run as hard as you can, hustle as much, focus, like do everything you can, bust your tail, because that's what these people are doing on a daily basis, and they are making a fraction of what you make. And so I think that can also spark more of an emotional investment.
Mhm. Yeah, that we also had a clip yesterday about Tom Brady and Baker Mayfield. Baker was commenting how he was brought in to bring fun back to football.
Mhm.
And Tom Brady said, I don't know about fun. I'm here to win. If I want to have fun, I'll take my kids to Disneyland.
Mhm.
So in that, there was this whole difference that Tom Brady's whole attitude was towards winning, and it was winning. I don't think it was just about him winning. It was really for the team, for the city, he took his job very seriously in that, and his intensity was on bringing greatness wherever he went. And I think that's where, in looking at individual player attitudes, I think that part of when you're looking through your lens, we've talked about your level of integrity, your hard work, what you want to bring. It's not just about you. It's about the we, and it's about team. And I think that's what sets athletes like you apart from maybe some other athletes, and you may have seen them, or who we seem to see, who seem to have a sense of entitlement, and wherever they go they almost expect to be waited on, and the fans are an afterthought in some of those situations. So I think that's a factor to look at too. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think, let's say as it relates to, Tom Brady, Baker Mayfield situation, I think that, that attitude to go out and be successful, which ultimately success is determined by wins, not by, hey, I went out and I threw for, 300 yards, 400 yards, or hey, I threw, 3 touchdowns and my stats individually are racking up. It was like, no, ultimately you measured your success by wins, like a Derek Jeter, right? Derek Jeter,
Mhm.
Hall of Fame player, but he measured his success by winning. And I think one commonality between, let's just say, a Derek Jeter and a Tom Brady is look at the fan bases that they had.
Mhm.
New England Patriot fans, right? I liken to Boston Red Sox fans. They are passionate, they are intense, they expect. New York Yankee fans, same thing. So I don't think that it was just the fan bases that brought this kind of attitude out of these players. I think there was a
Right.
combination between these were winning type of championship players already, but the environment that they were put into only increased that focus and caused
Mhm.
them to measure their success by wins, which is ultimately that's I think in a lot of ways is a little others focused. When I'm
Mhm.
talking about wins, that means I'm thinking about everybody else on my team and our fan base. If I'm saying,
Mhm.
"Hey, I can be successful as a player if I go out and hit 300, hit 25 home runs, drive in, 90 runs, man, I did well and I'm going to get paid." Did we win anything? Maybe not, but hey, I did my job. Well,
Mhm.
guys like that, it's not enough to say I did my job. They have to rally and spur an environment around them as leaders, as captains, for everyone
Mhm.
to raise their level of play so that we ultimately get the win. And that's
Mhm.
what's impressive about, that. And I think, with Baker Mayfield, there's a sort of a generation gap, between Tom Brady age and Baker Mayfield, and I understand. Um, I think you have to appreciate both. You appreciate what Tom Brady brought, and you appreciate what Baker Mayfield brings, and each uniquely, realizing their potential. And so, um, I just think and I think as well, this generation and where kids are, today, I say kids, young men. Um, I just think it's a little different. I mean, um, you have to try to enjoy what you're doing, um, the best you can. And I think there is also more of a mindset that, we're going to enjoy life. It's like my wife and I talk about this sometimes with this younger generation. You and I were more focused, I think, across the board. People in our era was that, hey, got to get a good job, got to, grind it out, got to work. Hey, you may not love it, but you got to do it. You just got to make it happen. You got to do it. You got to, where kids today are like, they want to do what they love, you know,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
a lot of them don't have jobs, or the jobs, maybe in their career field, but it's like, I just decided that I really didn't like doing that. Well,
Mhm.
for me and for my wife and for our age, it was like, what do you mean you don't like doing it? You're getting paid really good money. It doesn't
Right.
matter whether you like it or not. You go do it. And so I think
Suck it
that's
up.
also different, these days.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And and even taking all these things we're talking about pros, I think that's what's getting extended now back into college football and will continue because of the NIL deals and because of our sports concepts that we're extending in competition and winning. And that's, I think, some of the issues that you're seeing affecting players today, and then we've touched on media scrutiny a bit
Mhm.
and how that can affect. But as you said, it's, we're going now, and you can't just put down the newspaper. You've also got social media, and that's huge to me. I've seen how many trolling videos, have I seen about just the Ohio State Michigan game, and Ryan Day being owned by Sharon Moore, and then you got to look at the Alabama Auburn game and all these other rivalries that the scrutiny is pretty heavy. So impact of social media, we're touching on that as well.
Mhm.
Home field advantage. So, when you talk about some of the series that you've had and some of the games when you were in college and the not just necessarily in rivalries, but in games in general, do you feel like home field advantage is a huge piece emotionally and energetically from the player standpoint?
There's two sides of that coin, and it
Hmm.
can be, because there's a greater comfort level when you're at home, when you're sleeping in your own bed, when you have a routine that's very familiar to you. But then
Hmm.
there's sometimes where that can be too much of a comfort, and you don't have the edge that you need to have to go out and say, hey, we're going to be in hostile territory. We better be focused on every
Hmm.
single pitch, every single play, or else they're going to run us off the field. So so it's never one all the time. um I think that it can be, either or. And I mean, I hate to bring this up, right, but last week, your Buckeyes and
Hmm.
Wolverines, I was watching
Hmm.
the pregame show, and every analyst on the Fox pregame show, except for one former, Michigan player, was, Ohio State's gonna run away with this game. It's obvious they're a better team. They're having a better season, and
Hmm.
the Michigan player said, "Hey, don't sort of forget about the impact of this rivalry and coming into
Hmm.
this place." And, it was an incredible game, and Michigan ends up, beating Ohio State in Ohio. And so that's a situation where, you could just looking from the outset, you could say, well, home field advantage, Ohio State, they should have ran away with it. Or if Michigan was at home, maybe Woody would have given them a better chance of winning that game because they were at home, but they went in on the road and they took care of business. And so I just think it comes down to each individual, each team, how they sort of channel and view their circumstances, you know,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, and it's just not, it can never be, an automatic across the board. I think it used to be that way more so, where it's like, oh, home field advantage was a bigger factor.
Hmm.
I just don't think it's as big of a factor as it used to be, and that's just my opinion.
No, excellent, excellent insight. Again, that we're talking about those variables that affect players' performance, and you're saying that is a changeable variable depending on the individual, depending on circumstances, and all these pieces. So I think it's a it's a good point to address there. And I think so. College sports dynamics. When you look at towns that are college town, I would say even though Columbus is the Blue Jackets, really that's a college town. Tuscaloosa is a college town. Athens is a college town. What do you think that college sports dynamic? I mean, could you say Reno's a college town, or UNLV with you, and maybe even in Las Vegas that might have been considered a college town, but it's got a whole other feel to it. So, what are your thoughts
Yeah.
on that college
Yeah. So
sports dynamic?
yeah, for me personally, I would say that neither Nevada Reno or UNLV was comparable to any of these other schools that you mentioned in terms of a college town. But between the two, because Reno was smaller and there were less, glitz and glam all around, my opinion was it was more of a college town than UNLV. But with that said, when you start talking about, these major, Power 5, top, 10 schools and, what that brings, I think it's immense. I mean, that kind of environment, that type of support, that type of energy that's, in the town around, and you're also like almost in this little bubble where it's just like we're in this like just bubble of life and school and sport and everything else. And it's just like there's this outside world, but we're not really participating in it. Like we're in this bubble and world. So I think it's great. Unfortunately, I didn't have an opportunity to go to one of those schools where I could really experience that. And I didn't play, you know, so much, professionally for a team that I would really say, you know, a Philly, a New York, a Boston, where it's like, man, this fan base and this atmosphere is kind of, you know, comparable to a college town feel of just how much energy and focus and attention is being, paid towards that team. That it's like that team and or that school's sport is everything. It's
Mhm.
everything like the whole ecosystem like revolves around their athletics. And
Right,
that's pretty
right.
cool. But I would say that I didn't get to taste the cream of the crop as far as my career being in that kind of environment. Chicago White Sox fans are pretty passionate. Chicago's that kind of city, but it just wasn't to that level. And I would say, Chicago Cubs fans, there's a much greater energy in Wrigley Field than there is, at whatever it is now, Guaranteed Rate Field, the Chicago White Sox. Its name has changed so many times, but
Hmm.
I think it's an important dynamic.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, good, good. Community and identity. I think we've touched on that throughout our discussion. Mental health consideration. This to me is really key in this discussion, obviously, and where we're talking about. But yesterday, one of the points we ended with was the increase in domestic abuse
Mm,
after losses of games, and especially rivalry games. We're talking about 10 to 20% increase in calls to police and or visits to emergency rooms as a result of domestic violence. But also, that's just one piece in terms of community mental health issues. I wanted to really kind of here address some of the mental health considerations for athletes that to me I would wonder how many really are the walking wounded between having issues with anxiety, depression, potentially post-traumatic stress that
mm.
maybe they don't realize the impact of while they're playing. Maybe some of these things sneak in afterwards. And I know you were trusting enough on the last episode, the NL episode, to talk about some of your challenges that brought you to the sport that you've experienced. So what are your thoughts on some of those mental health considerations, especially where you have fans maybe consistently or periodically negatively impacting you?
Yeah, I think something that can sort of curb that is the staff that you have internally. If you've got supportive coaches or a supportive manager, and even a good environment team wise, I really think that can minimize the negative sort of mental health effects. And, for me, I remember having a hitting coach when I was a rookie with the Chicago White Sox, and I was working on some things mechanically. I wasn't getting the results that I needed. And I remember my hitting coach saying, "Hey, I'm not going to give up on you until, at least, 48 hours after you give up on yourself." So he was like just reassuring me that, like, I believe in you, you can do this, you can make these adjustments. And even if you give up on yourself, I'm not giving up on you for a while, after that. And so,
Mhm.
that kind of support, I think internally can make a huge difference. And one thing that just concerns me a little bit, as some of the experiences I've had with my own kids or my friends' kids at the college level, is that there are some individuals coaching that you kind of wonder, should they really be handling these young men and women, at a real critical developmental stage, going from, like, a teenager to becoming an adult. And there's, I'm sure, some really good coaches out there, and I think there's some bad coaches that just don't get it. They don't understand how to nurture, how to develop. Maybe they're dealing with their own pressures of, hey, I got to go out and win. I don't have time. I got to find, whoever's going to produce. And
Mhm.
when you're just looking at it that way, you're not really building trust. In relationships, it's really transactional, and it's like whoever
Mhm.
produces is playing. Whoever produces is playing, rather than saying, "Hey, we recruited you here. We believed in what we saw, what you had, in high school and everything else, and we're going to give you an opportunity to succeed, and we're going to support you in that." Rather than just, I think they're so quick to pull the plug now, um,
Mhm.
on players. And some people could say, well, on the flip side, these players are very quick to go into the transfer portal and go somewhere else.
Mhm.
So yeah, it does work both ways, but I think that when you can internally, staff wise, have people that have your back, that can go a really long way.
And how often do you think that, what percentage of player, and you might not have it, but do you think after their sports are done playing, they're done playing, that they bring some of these issues into their personal life, or they've been there and they just tried to cover it up, and now they don't have that distraction of playing a sport to get in the way and mitigate some of their underlying issues that may have been growing as a result in some ways about playing in that sport, and experiencing these experiences of whether it's team morale issues or their own personal issues or fan issues, and feeling like they've let people down or missed the key kick, and it continues to spin in their head.
Yeah, for me personally, my opinion is that it's not that significant in terms of, individuals that are carrying, failures um, further into life, like once they're done playing. I think that the biggest, sort of mental health considerations are the transition out of the sport. Whether you're a college player and it's over after college, the challenge that it might have, because you've been playing the sport since you were a kid and you really don't see it ever ending. And then you take it to the next level where you're a professional and you get to extend that. You don't know anything else. All you know is that this is all I've ever done. So
Mhm.
my biggest concern, and what I'm doing, working at the Major League Baseball Players Association, is we're trying to, soften the landing for
Mhm.
players that, are experiencing transition out of the game into regular life. Because in my opinion, that can be the most dangerous part of it, is figuring out my identity. Who am I? What's
Mhm.
value that I have? What transferable skills do I have? I just, a lot of times guys look and say, I just played a sport. I, you know, I don't have any transferable skills to go into the workforce or corporate America or whatever it is, when there are transferable skills that they have. Someone just has to help them recognize those. So that's, to me, I would say, is the biggest concern, is the transition out of the sport once it's over. Whether you're college, and you had hopes and dreams of playing professionally, or you're professional and maybe your career didn't go as well as you wanted to. Maybe it went pretty well, and maybe it went great. Everyone, to some degree, is going to go through some challenges, by and large, of
Mhm.
transitioning out of the sport and then becoming a quote unquote civilian and trying to figure out, purpose in life.
hmm hmm Okay, good. So, do you think that that the community that even the players coming from, whether it's within the team or even the city they might play in, and the level of support of that can even help moderate that transition and mitigate some underlying stressors?
Um, I think at the college level, being connected to a community, I think that can be helpful, because you are part of a bigger community, and you're around, non-sport people. You're, professors or different, leaders on campus and things like that. So you're part of a network and a community that I think can make that transition easier. From a professional standpoint, it's not so much. You're not part of this bigger community. You're part of your community is baseball players, coaches, general managers, and it's all about what's happening between the lines. There's no
Mhm,
talking about, hey, how are you doing in your classes? What's your GPA? There's nothing, all there is baseball. And so I
mhm,
think when that's over, there's a huge, hole that, guys can sort of fall into that, baseball used to fill. Now it's not there anymore. And,
mhm,
the challenge of figuring out what's next. Who am I? What's sad is that, you hear an individual, or let's just say if it was me, yeah, I used to be Chris Singleton. That's really sad when you hear a former athlete.
You literally hear people say, "I used to be."
Yeah, I mean, you've heard people, it's not like you hear it all the time, but there have been,
Yeah,
athletes that have been, yeah, I used to be, Oscar Gamble. Yeah, I used to be Michael Jordan. I'm not saying that Michael Jordan said that, but there
right,
is
right.
this element of, hey, that's my identity was wrapped up in what I was, basketball player,
Mhm,
football player, baseball player, and everybody loved me then. That's when I had,
yeah,
purpose and impact and meaning. And now in this next phase of life, I'm lost. Nobody
mhm,
cares. I'm not doing anything that's, impacting, anyone. And they can get stuck in that of like, yeah, I used to be somebody.
mhm,
I used to be a kind of a big deal. And
right.
now I'm not. And so, just one of the things we just, this past week had our executive board meetings for the Players Association. And it's a long week and the player representatives are there, the subcommittee and all that stuff. And so I had to present on my areas of, mental health, financial literacy, and education and career development transition. And one thing I wanted to really do is take the opportunity to remind these guys that you're more than just a baseball player, as it relates to particularly career development and transition, is that your second act in life. And I asked them to raise their hands. Not many hands went up. I said, how many believe that your second act in life can actually be better than your first? Who would
Mhm,
dare to believe that?
yeah,
And
yeah,
not many hands went up because
mhm,
understandably so, you're at the pinnacle of life as a major league baseball player. And
mhm,
what could I possibly do after this that would be more significant? And I said, you don't have to look very far. You can look around this room. Look at Tony Clark, who is the executive director of the Players Association. He played 15 plus years in the major leagues. I asked him,
mhm,
how many of you did his career have an impact on your life?
mhm,
Well, not
mhm,
really. But how many of
yeah,
you, what he's doing as this executive director is impacting your life? All the hands went up.
mhm,
It's impacting your
mhm,
families. It's forging ahead and continuing to create opportunities for you and your families to play this game and to earn as much as you possibly can and have a great experience. So, my thing is that we have to develop that mindset and help these players as they're getting ready for transition, or maybe even before they're at the point of transition, trying to instill into them that you are more than just X. You are more
mhm,
than just a football player. You are more than just a basketball player. You're more than just a baseball player, and try to
right.
condition their minds so that they might be able to see that, hey, in my, second act of life, I might be able to actually be more impactful than I was in this first. And
Mhm,
so the big difference I think is that your first act when you're a professional athlete, it's impacting you and it's impacting your family directly. You're playing this game, you're getting all kinds of perks, all kinds of relationships, business relationships, you're making great money. Your second act, I believe, becomes about others. And oh, wow, what I'm doing now with my life is
Mhm.
having a greater impact on other people, which both are important. But I think when you look at it, what's more rewarding than having an impact on other people's life and helping them advance forward and move forward? So those are things that I'm trying to instill and create a
Mhm.
mindset, with our players and hopefully in other unions and, sports and, college and everything that, they're looking at the bigger picture for these, players, because the thing is that you're going to be a former athlete a lot longer than you were an active athlete in your life.
Mhm. Mhm.
But it's
And
hard,
I
it's
think
hard to grasp that.
And the other side of that is you're talking about the players who say, "I used to be this athlete, and this great athlete." What about the Norwoods who went wide? What was it? Wide left in the Super Bowl, and who for the Bills, or the Jim Kellys, or the Ernest Byners, who the fumble. So we have all these players who almost their brand that people carry with them, or people in a city or a team love a team carry with them, are when that player messed up, disregarding all of those successes that they had. How did they get to that level? Success. What are they remembered for? The fumble, the wide right, the wide left, all these things. And that's a whole different player identity issue that I think can more strongly affect their mental health, even though they've had all this other success. So, yeah, we see many, many more athletes who probably don't have that brand attached to them, that negative brand attached to them, and they're going to have a whole, well, this is what I'm missing now. Whereas for some, I would imagine it could be a relief, or they wish they could have those times back and are living in their own situation of all the other things that they wish they could show people rather than just their perceived failure.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think that's it. And
I
and then
agree.
what we're moving on to from there is
Let me
our
let me
coping mechanism.
let me say one thing, because I want to add
Hmm.
this to that point. You made a great point about, you know, that one failure that overshadows like years of success that a player had. For me in my sport, in baseball, I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but it was, I think, the '86 World Series, Boston Red Sox and the New York Mets. You know, little roller up the first base line. Bill Buckner's there, goes through his legs. Mookie
Yeah.
Wilson, comes around, scores or whatever it is, and Mets end up winning that World Series. Well, Bill Buckner lived the rest of his life and career, or the rest of his life, I would say, with the only thing that people knew him for was missing a easy routine ground ball that cost them the World Series. This guy had a
Mm.
great career. I mean, he had almost 3,000 hits, 2,700 hits. 3,000 hits is the holy grail. He had almost 3,000 hits and had an
Mhm.
almost 290 batting average. But it was sad for me, and it was almost a cautionary tale in some ways, where guys are like, man, I never want to be Bill Buckner. Like, man, I never that. And that could happen to anybody. This guy was a good first baseman, but it just happened at the worst time possible. And it's sad because that's all he was remembered for. He was the face of losing that, and he's no longer with us. But it's really a tragic story of this sport and how this game doesn't always love you back.
Yeah. And the people who cheer for you one moment can be hating on you the next. And that's where, when we accentuate losing and we hold on to the pain of those losses, this is just a in general life thing. And we do that either ourselves or to the people around us. I think we have to look at what we're bringing to them. We're not adding to the quality of their life. We're detracting from it, because somehow maybe it feels like it makes us feel better inside, if we can remind everybody of their failures so that I can feel like they should feel worse than me. I think the thing we got to realize is we should be here to bring each other up, just like what they did, that whole culture of Philadelphia changing. let's see if we can try to turn this guy's slump around. And they did by cheering for him, by supporting him. And those are the things I really want people to take from this episode about not just their approach towards sports, not just their approach towards these rivalries, but it's how do we, as a community, as a family, as a fan base, as a world, really help to see how we can bring people together to lift them up, to help them to see their best and to be able to realize their best because they don't feel like they have all these other obstacles to contend with that distract them from their focus.
Yeah.
And that's a coping mechanism right there, as we're talking about, is to be able to mitigate those things by really finding your best and having supportive people around you. I mean, would you agree with that, Chris?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you nailed it. There's really nothing I can add to that. It's just so important and not everybody's going to do it because, like you said, people have their own issues, their own insecurities. It's easier for me to look at, like the Bible says, you look at the speck of dust in your brother's eye and don't realize you got a 2x4 coming out of your eye,
Right.
And so,
Right.
like,
did they have 2x4s back then?
Yeah, well, it says a plank, so I just modernized it to say a 2x4. But essentially, in our day and age, that's what it'd be like having a 2x4 coming out of your eye, and you're talking
Yep.
about a speck of sawdust in somebody else's eye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no, that's again what I appreciate about our talks, and is again you're about building people up and helping them to find their best and be their best. And we're both on the journey to do that with ourselves. So I think that both of us are probably looking at the own specks in our eyes as much as maybe we're trying to see how we can help pull that plank out of other people's eyes as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key to what we're trying to do here. So I appreciate your time. I know you were feeling a little under the weather, and you gave me a generous dose of your time today, and our viewers and listeners too. So I really always appreciate being a part of these discussions. And,
Yeah, this is great. Good conversation. I think we talked about some important topics, and hopefully those of you that are watching this or listening to it can take something and run with it and put it into practice for yourself, or help somebody else put it into practice.
Right. Absolutely. So again, appreciate your time. It is now time to go watch championship college football today, and all the leagues are having their championships. So I don't know if I can go for Penn State or Oregon more, but my parents are nitty kitties. My uncle was, my grandmother worked at this, so I might be a nitty kitty fan today.
Okay.
Who are you pulling for in the Big Ten? Are you Oregon, and you played out west, or don't have a dog in it?
I just tend to, many times, most of the time for me, I just like to see a good game. Like, I don't want to see a bad game or a blowout. I want to see just a fight to the end. And so I don't have, a dog in the race by any means. What do we got later on today? We got Georgia and Texas, right? SEC. That'll be a good one. But yeah, no, I just hope there's some good games. That's all. I like to see these guys go out and compete, leave it all on the field, and just see what the drama is at the end.
So given your Nevada tie, who were you rooting for last night more, Boise State or UNLV?
I would say Boise State. I mean,
Yeah.
Even though those two teams, when I played at Nevada, it was like those are the two teams that you kind of always were circling on the schedule. But the quote unquote hatred that Nevada Reno people have for UNLV and vice versa, I pretty much will root against anybody playing UNLV.
Yeah, I know that feeling. Except when it's a Big Ten bowl games, I'll be a Wolverines fan. But any other time of the year, no.
Yeah.
Not a Blue fan.
I don't even know if I could support UNLV in a bowl game.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Well, fun talking to you again, Chris. Thanks again for your time. All right, and until next time.